Welcome to Travel Italia, the show about travel in Italy. Hi, welcome to Travel Italia, the podcast all about traveling in Italy. Today I'm starting a series of episodes all about Lake Como, or in Italian, Lago di Como, which is one of the most popular vacation destinations in Italy. I decided to do a series about the lake because I just happen to live about 35 minutes away from this very famous lake. So I know it well, and I want to share my insights with you. I'm there pretty frequently, and people are always asking me for information, recommendations, and tips. Let's start with some general facts about the lake. For those of you who maybe have heard of Lake Como but don't know exactly where it is, it's located in Lombardy, which is Lombardia, in northern Italy, a few kilometers from the Swiss border and about 50 kilometers north of Milan. It's a glacial lake, which means the source of the water of the lake comes from glaciers in the Alps, which run down the mountains, obviously forming the Adda River, which then flows into the lake from northeastern Valtellina area. It is the third largest lake in Italy after Lake Garda and Lake Maggiore, and it is the deepest lake in Italy and the fifth deepest lake in Europe. And it's surrounded by mountains that are part of the Pre-Alp mountain range. I think part of the breathtaking beauty of this lake is due to the fact that it's surrounded by pretty dramatic mountains along its shores. And there are so many terraced, picturesque little towns and villages dotted around the lake. There are gorgeous lakeside villas. And some consider this lake to be the most beautiful lake in the world. The shape of the lake is pretty unique. It's the shape of an inverted Y. So the upside down Y makes two forks of the lake, the western and the eastern forks. Lake Como is enormous. It has an area of 146 kilometers, that's 56 square miles. It would be really difficult to see it all in one day. And in the time that I've lived here and the many times I've visited the lake, I don't think I've ever seen all of it. So there is a lot to see. Let's talk about the lake's history. The Romans conquered the Celtic tribes of the area in 196 BC. Then in 59 BC, Julius Caesar founded the town of Novum Comum, what is modern day the city of Como at the bottom of the western fork of the lake. The city of Como today is the largest city on the lake. So since Roman times, wealthy people have built villas along the lake and enjoyed its stunning views and mild climate. Now, over the centuries, the appeal of the lake grew and wealthy families continued and still continue to build elaborate, beautiful vacation villas on the lakefront. Even to this day, the lake continues to draw the world's rich and famous. So people like Matthew Bellamy, John Kerry, Madonna, George Clooney, Gianni Versace, Ronaldinho, Sylvester Stallone, Julian Lennon, Richard Branson, and Lionel Messi are just a few of the rich and famous that have homes along the lake. Just as a side note, I happen to know exactly where George Clooney lives, and I can share with you that the locals absolutely adore him. They love to talk about how he gets involved with the community and what a great guy he is. So why is this lake such a popular vacation destination? Why all the hype? Why do so many people from all over the world want to visit Lake Como? Well, as I mentioned before, the lake's location is really unique, being surrounded by steep mountains and dotted with quaint, colorful terraced villages. It really is a feast for the eyes and the senses. It has an undeniable old world charm that makes it look as if it came out of a storybook. It's hard to describe, but the beauty of the lake and the mountains surrounding it is just so peaceful. It's the kind of place where the views are so spectacular, it just stops you in your tracks. And you just want to stop and take it all in by parking yourself at a waterfront cafe so you can nurse a coffee or sip on a glass of wine while you admire the stunning view. I've been to the other two major lakes in northern Italy, Lake Maggiore and Lake Garda. And I can tell you, they're both beautiful, but they don't have the dramatic beauty that Lake Como does. Let's talk about the two largest lakeside towns on Lake Como. As I mentioned before, the city of Como, which is at the bottom of the Western Fork, is the largest town. It's got a population of 83,500 people, so it's a fairly large city. It's incredible to think that this town dates back to 59 BC. Today, it's a bustling town that pretty much thrives on tourism and silk production. So if you're visiting Como, look for silk shops, which there are a few dotted through the city. The heart of the old town is still, to this day, surrounded by the Roman walls. Now, of course, over time, the walls have been repaired, reconstructed, but you can see the original blueprint of the town as you enter the gates and walk through its streets. This part of the city within the walls is predominantly pedestrian only, so it's a good idea to park outside the walls and walk in. I really love this part of Como. One of my favorite things to do for an afternoon is to take the train to Como and walk through the narrow cobblestone streets, admiring all the beautiful shops and treating myself to lunch or an aperitivo at one of the many restaurants. The old city center has a lot of charm, and it's well worth spending an afternoon wandering through its streets and visiting its medieval churches. So, Como is the largest town on the Western Fork, and the town of Lecco is the largest on the Eastern Fork, and it's located at the very southern tip of the lake, so at the bottom of the lake. So you have Como at the bottom of the Western Fork, Lecco at the bottom of the Eastern Fork. Now, Lecco is much smaller than Como. It only has a population of 48,300 residents. And its history is interesting because it's strategically important militarily in the past, so lots of battles have been fought there. But it was, for a very long time, just a small autonomous state with its own civil and criminal laws, and eventually came under the rule of the Dukes of Milan, and then eventually became a city. Today, Lecco is a beautiful little lakeside town with a relaxing waterfront and quaint streets. It doesn't have a lot to offer in comparison to Como, but it's a nice place to take a stroll and have lunch. Now, aside from the two biggest towns, Como and Lecco, there are, I don't know how many exactly, I should know, I suppose, many towns that dot the lakeside around the lake. But all of these are much smaller. There are little towns, or in some cases, tiny little villages. Now, the most famous of these towns on the lake are all located in the center of the lake, and they are Bellagio, Varena, Menaggio, and Tremezzo. If you've ever seen photos or videos of the lake, they were most likely taken at one of these towns. They are the iconic towns of Lake Como. And they're all very tiny and extremely well preserved and pretty much cater to tourists. Of the ones I listed, Bellagio is definitely the most popular, the most well-known, and the biggest. And although these towns are, let's say, the crown jewels of the lake, There is so much more to see, which we'll cover in future episodes. In the next episode, we'll talk about how to get to Lake Como and how to get around Lake Como. I'll walk you through all the details and give you my recommendations. You know, one of the reasons I started this podcast is to help people with the nuts and bolts of traveling in Italy, the details that maybe aren't so glamorous or they're not addressed often but are important when you're planning a trip. So stay tuned as we continue this series about Lake Como. We'll cover all kinds of topics from how to get around to what there is to do, to accommodations, what to expect, etc. If this has been helpful, please rate the show, follow the podcast, and share it with your travel buddies. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I wish you a buon viaggio. Ciao!